It's out with the old and in with the new in the Suicide Squad, but in this wild and crazy world with dudes with detachable arms, dudes who should just compete in the Olympics, and polka-dotted people with parental problems, there's a whole lot going on, so let's take a look at some of the things you may have missed. Oh, and spoilers, like a whole bunch of them. Let's start off with one of, if not the most important pieces of Suicide Squad history. This guy here. Now, I know he may just look like a prison doctor who may enjoy his job a little too much, but he's being played by John Ostrander, who is the creator of the second and modern version of the Suicide Squad, or Task Force X if you want to get serious about it. John launched the Suicide Squad solo comic in '87 and is responsible for creating DC's Waldorf Warden, Amanda Waller, with Lynn Wein and John Byrne. He's also worked on Marvel comics like Heroes for Hire, X-Men, and The Punisher, which makes this cameo even cooler by immortalizing such an influential comics writer. Now onto a character that is not so influential or helpful or even cool, the Detachable Kid. Now, if you've never heard of him, and why would you have, it's because he's kind of a new character and kind of not. So in the comics, there is no character named T.D.K, and why would the DC fandom lie to me? There is, however, a character from Secret Origins Volume 2 that has abilities so similar that this just has to be a reimagining of the character. That character's name is Arm Fall Off Boy. Yes, that is the name he chose to go with, which means that any idea given the right circumstances can work. Take that however you want to. Now, there are enough differences to make them distinct, such as Arm Fall Off Boy actually being a hero, even if it is below F tier, and being from the 31st century, but there's no way TDK and AFOB, yeah, that doesn't actually have a good ring to it, aren't the same character with slight changes that are almost inconsequential. Another character that would be lucky to have their name written on a piece of paper somewhere in Arkham is Kaleidoscope. She first debuted in a Superboy comic from 1982 and hasn't been seen or heard from since. You'll be able to find her right before Waller takes Peacemaker and Bloodsport to meet Ratcatcher 2. She's the one who looks like Stained Glass Girl, who I hope is not a real character. With her being so niche and unremarkable, has actually made some people think that she's a gender swap version of Crazy Quilt, which is yet again a character that you'd be forgiven for thinking is a joke, and I mean, he is, but if you look during the credits, you'll see Kaleidoscope right above our next super weird character. Also, during our tour of Belle Reve, we meet this guy, Double Down, a man who got powers from having a cursed deck of cards bonded to his skin. Now, as a person that likes Gambit and is still waiting on that Channing Tatum-led movie that will absolutely never happen, I enjoy characters using cards with their powers as much as the next guy, but this is a little much even for me. What's next? A guy that only commits crimes on certain days of the month? Unfortunately, yes, that is next. In the same scene, right next to him in fact, is Calendar Man, a man who commits crimes based on holidays. You think that would make him really easy to catch since you know when the next crime is gonna happen, but hey, Batman's the world's greatest detective, not me. While Calendar Man has somehow made his way into multiple Batman stories, most notably The Long Halloween, even though his MO is silly, Calendar Man has proven himself to be a dangerous member of the Bats Row Gallery. He's also being played by Sean Gunn, who often appears in his brother's movies, either from mocap like with the nightmare that is Weasel, or standard acting like with Kraglin in both Guardians movies. When we get introduced to Bloodsport, unlike some other characters, he seems to be doing his very best to stay out of trouble and just serve a sentence for putting Superman in the intensive care unit by putting a kryptonite needle right next to his pectorals. What you might not know is that this is a legit plot point in a Superman comic from 1987, and while this is the only real thing Bloodsport does before he faces a similar fate to Supes, only he doesn't survive. By the end of the movie though, Bloodsport seems to at least be a little reformed, and with him no longer under Waller's grasp, at least for now, hopefully he can stay out of any more Superman-related conflict. Right after the first Suicide Squad leave to go to Corto Maltese, back at Belle Reve, a bunch of people, honestly looks like the entire team, are betting on who they think is going to survive the mission. For fans of the Merc with the Mouth, this is how he got his name. Not Merc with a Mouth, it's Deadpool. I'm talking about Deadpool. When Deadpool the movie first came out, James was extremely supportive and was very outspoken on why he thought the movie worked, while also cautioning movie studios to not learn the wrong lesson about what made that movie so good. It's no secret that James is a huge Deadpool fan, so by putting an actual Deadpool in the movie is another great way to show his love for the character. In more DC-related fare, in the scene where Waller is practicing her putting skills while her team is off, doing Task Force X stuff, she mentions a Senator Cray. Now, as a well-connected political operative, this just seems like a throwaway line about a random dude in Congress, but Senator Cray is important because he's the father of Adam Cray, who would later take over the Atom from Ray Palmer. Adam the Atom in the comics has worked with the Suicide Squad even though his father was unalived by Deadshot, who's also on the team. As this movie showed, Waller seems to always have a plan B ready to go, so for the new Suicide Squad, maybe we can get a look into Cray's short-lived time as the mini molecular man. Jotunheim, not to be mistaken with the land of the Frost Giants, I know, it's very easy to get that mixed up, is taken straight from Task Force X's very first mission in Ostrander's run. The specifics of the mission are vastly different. No intergalactic telepathic starfish or a scientific hellraiser in that one, but the name and general idea of the Suicide Squad going in to destroy a World War II era German-built facility is the same. At this point, it's pretty easy to see how much of a love letter this movie is to Ostrander and his work, and the way some of his initial ideas were reinvented to fit in Gunn's wild interpretation is a sight to see. Another reference to that fateful, although somewhat uneventful in the grand scheme of things, first mission comes during the debrief scene. The one where Peacemaker uses his knowledge of slang to potentially deduce a connection between the codename of the Starro project. Well, that's straight from the comics. Not what starfish can mean in an anatomical context, but the debrief in a small theater room. It plays out the exact same way, with Waller only giving some of the information related to the mission while showing a slideshow of important people and location. There isn't a joke about an overhead projector though. Not sure what tech was outdated in the 80s to fill in for that though. Maybe like an abacus or something. A reference to a non-superhero franchise comes in the form of Bloodsport's helmet. Instead of the bandana that the Dubois incarnation of the character wore, Bloodsport's headgear in this movie seems a little more otherworldly. Some might even say alien. Now, there is no in-continuity reason, at least that I was able to get from the movie, but his helmet looks to be a very clear reference to the xenomorphs from the Alien franchise. If you want to go deep in the crates, since there was a Batman vs. Predator comic in 1992, and we know through the critically lauded Alien vs. Predator in 2004 that everyone loved, that those characters are in the same universe, which means that there is a chance, however small, that Bloodsport could have seen a xenomorph somehow and decided to model his helmet after that. Why he wouldn't model it after a predator when he's a mercenary is kinda weird, but hey, I'm not here to judge. Now back to a comic reference that you don't have to do mental gymnastics to justify. Let's talk about Rick Flag. When we're introduced to him in the movie, he's wearing your standard military guy garb, but once he rejoins the team after having some nice tea with the locals, we see him sporting a yellow t-shirt with a cartoon on it. That yellow shirt, sans cartoon, is a reference to his comic version where he wears that same shirt all the time. At least he was able to wear his favorite color before having one of the worst days you could possibly have. Let's shift to some more fun references. While the movie lingers on the keychain enough to be noticed, you may not know exactly what it's a reference to. The keychain is of a character named Mafalda, which is a comic strip character like the ones in the newspapers. Remember those? She was incredibly popular in the 60s and 70s in Latin America, and since Corto Maltese is a small island off the coast of South America, it would make sense for her to pop up there. It also makes sense as a reference since she's in the truck driven by Milton, who's a part of the resistance, as Mafalda was designed to represent the Argentinian middle class and progressive youth. She also looks like Little Lulu from comic strips in the 30s, but most notably from her show back in the 90s, although there doesn't actually seem to be a connection between the two characters, which is weird. But go watch the Little Lulu show though, highly recommended. As this is a James Gunn directed movie, he made sure to get some of the cast from his work with the other multi-million-dollar franchise of weirdo misfits that shouldn't work, but somehow work together. So starting off, we have Michael Rooker, who played Mary Poppins in both Guardians of the Galaxy movies as Savant. We've already talked about Sean Gunn as Calendar Man, Sylvester Stallone, who plays Stakar in Guardians 2 as King Shark, Nathan Fillion, who played T.D.K, had a cameo as this blue guy in the first Guardians, and there's even a cameo by Palm Clementieff, who played Mantis in Guardians 2 as a singer/dancer in the bar in Corto Maltese. Even one of the rats used on set was named Crisp Rat, which has to be a play on Chris Pratt, who of course played the honorless thief, Star-Lord. But the Guardians aren't the only MCU connections that this movie has. Idris Elba was Heimdall, the all-seeing god for multiple Thor movies, as well as his appearance in Infinity War. Taika Waititi, known for the lovable and cuddly rock monster Korg, first seen in his MCU directorial debut, Thor Ragnarok, plays Ratcatcher in this one, and to round this out, David Dastmalchian, who played Kurt in both Ant-Man movies, played Polka Dot Man in this. With all this cross-pollination between franchises, we might even get to see that DC vs. Marvel comic storyline on the big screen. I can't even say that with a straight face. Since Watchmen has been folded into the DC landscape with Doomsday Clock in 2017, this next one is technically an in-house reference. When Peacemaker touches Rick Flag's heart during their fight, Rick says, "Peacemaker, what a joke." Now, this incarnation of Peacemaker has multiple parallels with the comedian, like having a very specific way of looking at things like freedom and justice, as well as being ultra-violent. Comedian, however, was created as a sort of parody of Peacemaker pre-going crazy, so it's interesting that Peacemaker has come full circle and fully becoming the thing that was being made fun of. Here's a smaller blink and you'll miss it moment. Once the day is saved and the rest of the world learn about Task Force X's exploits in Corto Maltese, in the scene where Bloodsport's daughter is watching the news, the network shown is GBS, which stands for Galaxy Broadcasting System, which actually isn't a Guardians of the Galaxy reference. I mean, I guess it could be, but GBS is an offshoot of Galaxy Communications run by Morgan Edge, who has connections to Darkseid. Yeah, I know it's weird that this regular dude has a line to Apocalypse, but remember that Darkseid once worked at McDonald's, so anything's possible. Another moment that is incredibly easy to miss happens during the bar scene right when our anti-heroes come in. Peacemaker, in his way of making peace with the locals, bumps this guy. Now, I know he looks like some random old dude, but he's Lloyd Kaufman, co-founder of Troma Entertainment, where James Gunn first got his start with Tromeo and Juliet. With James so firmly set in his career now, it was nice to see him get a nod. Also, you can see him looking incredibly sad on the dance floor. Less fun, but hey, it do be like that sometimes. In a more positive moment of character growth, once the team gets Thinker and lets him know the plan, Harley says that if we find out you have personalized license plates, you die, which is a reference to 2016's Suicide Squad, where the Joker has a vanity plate that says "ha ha ha" on it. Good on her for realizing that vanity plates are almost always a red flag. So we've talked about Corto Maltese a lot in this video already, but did you know that Corto Maltese is also the name of a series of comics named after its protagonist? Corto Maltese started in 1967 and is all about the exploits of a sea captain during the early decades of the 1900s. Corto Maltese in DC Comics was first mentioned in Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, and the whole storyline in this movie, where the US government sends in a Black Ops team to depose a government, is similar, but they just sent Superman in for Miller's story, and I think you know how simple that one was for him. In the movie, there's a lot of different needle drops featuring various songs that give you a sense on what the characters are feeling, but what's interesting about all of them but one song is that they're all diegetic. That means that the songs are heard by the characters in the movie while we hear them too. The only one where that isn't true is the song that plays during Harley's breakout scene. The music isn't actually coming from anywhere, but considering how quirky Harley is, you could definitely just say that she's singing the song in her head or something. Since we're on Harley, let's just talk about her outfit really quick. During the first part of the movie, when she watches all of her friends' souls leave their body, her outfit looks extremely similar to that of Harley's from Arkham City, and if I'm not mistaken, that could be the first time that a DC movie has directly referenced one of their video game counterparts. Maybe that means Jason Todd in a completely different suit for no reason. Who knows? When we're first introduced to King Shark, it's an inversion of one of his most iconic panels in the comics, where he's reading the Essential Rumi, which is a collection of poetry to establish that he has a strong sense of intelligence. In the Suicide Squad, they went in a different direction, but the book that he's reading, The Varieties of Religious Experiences, looks at the individual's response to religion outside of the religious system itself, and given how Nanaue is the son of the shark god, maybe he's smarter than he's letting on. With Ratcatcher 2 having such a great relationship with the rodent population, there was bound to be some famous rat mentioned, and for this one, they went with Ratatouille, which is admittedly a pretty hard reference to miss. But another Ratatouille reference comes from the fact that the voice actor for Sebastian, the only named rat in the movie, D. Bradley Baker, actually did some voice work in the video game tie-in for Ratatouille. Might need to just do a 6 degrees of Ratatouille just to see what happens. Finally, let's end with one of the end credit scenes. I'm not talking about the first one because it features something unholy, so let's talk about how the end credit scene with Peacemaker actually surviving sets up him potentially working for Checkmate. In the comics, Checkmate is an independent team or offshoot of Task Force X. I mean, it's kind of the same thing, but it's more based in spy work and espionage. Given how aggressive and gung-ho Peacemaker was in this movie, if they do decide to fold Checkmate in with his show debuting next year, they might have to tone that down a bit. In a movie that takes some of DC's most F-tier and wacky characters and makes them work together whether they want to or not, there's bound to be some of the most off-the-wall references, and in this movie, it's really no different. Hopefully DC can keep some of this momentum and make movies that are fun and are worth watching more than once.